we figured since it's still winter up here, we still have snow on the ground. It was a good opportunity to talk about motor oil and what the viscosities mean. First of all, there's like those two numbers there, which a lot of people I don't think understand very well. And then, how does that affect the performance of the oil in cold start scenarios? Because we have some pretty serious cold starts up here. It's, minus 20 some days, and you go to start your engine and it barely wants to crank over. It's so cold. So
yep.
We thought, why not try to educate ourselves and our viewers a little bit about how oil factors into that whole scenario.
Well, great. Yeah. So, oil, from that's what we live for, obviously, on our side. And the viscosity of an oil is sort of that's the foundation when an engine developer or, an engineer is actually designing an engine, right? Any size, light duty, heavy duty, whatever it is. The viscosity of the oil, and we see the oil as the blood of the engine, right? So it's pumped through channels. It has an oil pump like a heart, and has to get to so many different parts of the engine. So the engineer has to design the clearances, the pump size, the pressure, the gallery, the channels, to make sure that oil gets there as quickly as possible. And one of the main factors for that is the viscosity of the oil. And the viscosity at low temperature, and you guys have a little lower temperature than we have here in Kentucky, and that can vary, right? So,
yeah.
But when you think about low temperature, they think as low as like minus 25 Celsius. So right. I'll talk in Celsius, guys. I can talk in Fahrenheit too.
There you go.
And 25, actually minus 25 Celsius is kind of around the same as minus 25 Fahrenheit. They kind of intersect at that low temperature. And then on the upper side, they're looking at kind of the temperature at, I'd say 100 C, right? So when an engine is now not all engines run that hot, obviously, but as the engine warms up, the oil temperature is typically around that 75, 80, 90 degrees C range. And so they have to design the engine to work in that range. Right. So when we formulate oils, and if we go to, say, the common grades that you're thinking about on shelf. So if you walk up to an oil shelf and you see a 10W30 or a 5W30, right? Those are what we call multi-grade engine oils. The W stands for winter, which is cold, right? So that first number is indicative of the cold temperature flow properties. So the lower that number is, the thinner the oil is. So the more fluid it is at low temperature, right? So a 0W, which you see a lot more of nowadays.
Yeah, true.
And I'm not sure what this engine is calling for. Do you know what the
I think it specifies 0W20, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's where the trend is. You said it's a Toyota engine. You said it's a four-cylinder.
It's actually a Subaru engine, but it's in partnership with Toyota.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So 2 liters, so really small. And the reason everybody's going to the 0Ws is because of fuel economy. Is to push the efficiency of the engines to get the most out of it. But that 0W is a viscosity. So Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE, actually owns the viscosity table. So if you go online and Google J300, SAE J300, you'll see a table of a lot of numbers. Okay. But what you'll see is that that 0W, it has a certain classification as far as viscosity goes. And actually they measure 2 different low temperature viscosities for that 0W. They measure what they call a CCS, which you guys may have heard of. It stands for cold crank simulator.
Okay.
It actually was designed by an Exxon engineer back in the 60s on his kitchen table. And it actually simulates the shearing that goes on with an oil pump, and also the shearing that goes on in an engine. Because if you think about it, engine oil, when it gets into an engine, it actually gets into very small areas, and also with moving parts. And so what I mean by shearing is the molecules can get aligned, or they can actually break, and your viscosity goes down. So you need to know the viscosity at when the engine's operating. So at a high shear, in a high shear environment, like going through a pump, or going through the engine itself. And also seeing the journal bearings, the piston rings against the sidewall of the combustion chamber. That's all shearing going on there. That's one viscosity that you'll see, CCS. The second one is actually the viscosity without shearing. So if you can imagine your oil sitting in the sump in the bottom of your engine and just being gravity fed to the engine pump. That's just gravity. That's under any shear. Strictly, it's the force of gravity trying to get that oil to flow to that oil pump. And that's the critical part. When you guys are sitting up there at, say, minus 20 C in Canada, you have to get the oil from the sump into that pump as quickly as possible so it can get pumped around. And if it's too thick, it'll just sit there, right? Just like a big glob, a big ball of oil, and it won't get to the pump, and then you're going to starve your engine, and that is going to cause you trouble right away. So those two viscosities are what we have to meet. So there's a requirement, a limit for a 0W, a 520, or a 5W, 10W, et cetera. And you're going to want to go to the lowest viscosity you can go to. But we always say at Valvoline, you want to look at your owner's manual. You want to look at what the engine designers recommend because they know the engine really well.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, a lot of cases with us, because we have such extreme winters and relatively hot summers too, a lot of guys go to a 5W30 or a 10W30 in the summer for track season. And then winter, they might go back to like a 0W20 or something like that because of the changing conditions. And that may fall slightly outside of the recommended parameters that are on the oil cap on the engine or something, but it's a fairly common practice up here. And it seems like it makes sense based on what you're telling me. Yeah,
obviously, from a Valvoline perspective, we like, the OEMs know their engines very well. Sure. And so they have chosen a certain viscosity grade to maximize the performance of their engine, but there is some allowance if I go off record, right? Yeah. For some of that change, going to a heavier oil in the summertime or a lighter oil in the wintertime. At the end of the day, though, the engine is capable of running in those conditions at that recommend. And you also see some European OEMs, actually a fair number of them. If you go to the owner's manual, actually has a chart, and they'll actually change the recommendation according to the season. They'll say, hey, if it's, there's tables, and I don't want to bring on any OEM specifically, but they do actually have, and they'll actually recommend certain viscosity grades, but there's overlap. And one viscosity grade should be fine for the entire seasons. Now, if you guys are getting, say, I'm going to say below minus 25 C, if you're getting into those kind of critically cold temperatures, then you have to really be concerned. That's why they have, engine block heaters. You may have a couple of those up there. If you're in that kind of severe environment, then you have to actually keep your engine oil warm, because it's very hard to formulate an oil that will flow in those really extreme cold temperatures. I'm assuming you guys aren't going to be that cold on average, but we
might get a cold snap for a few days, or in a really severe winter for a week or two. That is that cold, but generally speaking, we're more in the -5 to -15 range in the dead of winter. So and even that, our winters are pretty short now. I mean, I guess the upside to global warming is our winters have gotten a little less severe in a weird kind of way. Our seasons have shifted too strangely. But so on the topic of cold starts, this is something a lot of my friends debate is like, should I start my car in the morning? Should I have a remote starter, and should I let my car idle in the driveway for 5 minutes before I drive it to work in the dead of winter when it is a really cold day? Or am I better just to turn it on, let it warm up for 30 seconds, and then, apply very light load in the first few minutes? What's your recommendation for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we get that question asked a fair amount, because we don't have the same extreme temperatures as you do. But engine oil heats up, and you guys may have graphed it. If you looked at your data, you can actually look at the temperature increase for both the coolant and the engine oil, because they kind of go hand in hand. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes for oil to reach its sort of optimum or target temperature. It'll kind of flatten out asymptote. Now, of course, the colder it starts, so, as your engine sits there, it basically reaches the temperature of the outside air, right? So it's sitting there at, say, -10, -15 C. So the colder it is, the longer it's going to take to get up to that operating temperature. And that's where the engine wants to run. It wants to have the oil at that temperature. That's where the clearances were set. That's where the conditions, the design specs were set. But it can operate at the lower temperature too. But it wants to be there. So you want to get there as quickly as possible. And so that 5 to 10 minute range is kind of where you want to be. Now, the engine likes to run at higher RPMs. So you don't have to idle. An engine's not incredibly happy, as you guys know, at idle. It's not designed to really run as well there. but you want to make sure that you have the oil, say, at least pumped around a couple cycles. You know, the average oil pump, and I don't know if you guys are going to make any mods to the oil pump or the oil system.
No, not on this one, but
okay. It's about 5 to 10 gallons a minute, you know, depending on a lot of factors. Okay. So it takes about, you know, it could take 30 seconds for one circuit of the oil throughout your entire engine, right? And back to the oil pan. And so if you think about that as kind of a closed loop system. And so the oil has to go through the engine a couple times to get the heat from the combustion chamber to really start heating up. So, and the oil pump, and I don't know in this engine specifically, is usually tied to the crankshaft or the camshaft or the timing chain. So the faster your engine's running, the faster the pump is running. So it's actually moving oil around faster. So you don't have to idle for 10 minutes. You can actually turn the engine on and start driving right away. It's probably more comfort for the driver to get the heater going first. Yeah. Right? So, so the remote start, I think, helps the driver more than the engine, because the engine is designed to run in those conditions within reasonable, again, if we're getting into the extreme cold temperatures, that's a whole different ballgame. But there's no reason why you have to let your car sit in your driveway for 30 minutes before driving it in cold temperatures. It will be happy to, say, for 30 seconds to a minute, and then you start driving because it's still running. It's pumping the oil around faster. It's happy running at those higher RPMs as you drive down the road.
Well, that makes me feel better, because that's always been my approach, is just get it in and drive it, and don't pin it to red line until it's warmed up. And it seems to have worked okay for me. So.
Yeah, and I agree, and that's what we agree with too. Is, again, we're talking about sort of outside of the extreme conditions that you're talking about, but the engine is designed to operate at a fairly broad range of oil viscosities. I mean, it has to be. And so the engineers they're very smart guys. They've thought about this, right? They've really put a lot of time into it. Now, of course, an engine is happier in certain regions from an RPM standpoint, a load standpoint. So there are sweet spots, but you're not always there. And they know that. Your engines start stopping. It's changing all the time as you drive down the road. So it's got a fairly robust ability to adjust to those changes.
Right. So what about the conventional versus synthetic issue? Is there any, and this just kind of occurred to me when I was thinking about things I could ask you about, because I've never really thought about, is there a performance difference in cold weather with synthetic versus conventional? I have an okay understanding of how synthetics outperform a conventional oil in like a race environment, because that's more of where my interests lie, but I've never thought about it in terms of winter. So I'm curious, is there an advantage to running a high quality synthetic in the winter, or if it's really not so much temperature related?
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, so inherently, synthetic oils, the base oils that we use, have better low temperature properties than conventional oils just by themselves. Okay. However, when we formulate, we add additives to manipulate things in the oil, right? We need to adjust things. And one of those things is the low temperature performance. So you can take a conventional oil and add what we call pour point depressants that are basically small molecules, small polymers that you can add that actually prevent, say, mineral oils from thickening. And it does that. So the pour point is basically the minimum temperature at which an oil will flow. Okay. And so typically an oil has a pour point of around minus 30 C to minus 35 C in that neighborhood. But that's with the pour point added. So a conventional oil that you pick off the shelf will still have very good low temperature performance. However, a synthetic's going to be inherently better. It's going to have a slightly better pour point than, say, the conventional. However, it depends on the oil. Okay. Because they're going to be formulated differently. I can tell you that our Valvoline synthetic does have a benefit of a lower pour point and better low temperature viscometrics versus our conventional. It's just the way we formulate it. That's typically the case, but not always the case, because you have to look at a combination of the base oil and the additives.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think part of my reason for asking that question was, I don't personally do this, but some of my friends will run a synthetic in the summer because they think, oh, it's under more heat stress and I'm going to the track a few times, so I need that high quality oil in the summer. But in the winter, they'll put the cheap stuff in because they might just be commuting in the car, or they might just be storing the car, or driving it occasionally. So it's good to know that there is actually a performance difference between the synthetic and the base stuff, and I can maybe educate my friends a little bit on that way. Don't cheap out in the winter, guys.
I can tell you that synthetics inherently, like I said, are, they have better low temperature properties, and they also inherently more thermally stable. So in terms of what we call oxidation, so there's a lot of oxygen around in an engine, right, for the combustion. So in terms of breakdown, thermal breakdown, a synthetic's always going to be better. However, you can formulate by adding other additives, antioxidants, things of that nature, to offset that. So there is a way to sort of bring a conventional oil up to the same level or a similar level, but not every time. So you have to be, again, it's formulation specific. And so not every oil on the shelf is created equal. So I tend, I buy synthetic oils because just inherently they're going to be starting off from a better place than where a conventional is, and for other reasons too, of course. But they are more stable and have better low temperature properties overall.
Very cool. Well, I think that's covered it from my perspective from winter oil questions. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add that I just didn't think of. Is there anything that we've missed?
No, I don't think so. I think I think the important thing for the users of oil out there to understand is that the viscometrics of an oil is really the kind of the first level that we look at when we're designing an oil, and also when an engine designer is designing an engine. That viscosity is incredibly important. We add other things, detergents and dispersants and other additives to help the engine stay clean and other things. But the viscosity is really the critical design parameter for an engine. So we always say, number one, go to your owner's manual, use what it's recommending if you can. And because the engineers know what they were doing when they were designing it. However, as you manipulate, and if you're doing some modifications to an engine, or you're having some fun, there are some leeway there, but you want to be careful about viscosity. You don't want to go too thick, and you don't want to go too thin. And I'll mention that if you go too thin in an engine, the metal parts can get very close together. And you can really have, if you go to a 0W16, you'll start seeing 0W8 oils out there. Yeah. You got to be very careful going to those extremely low viscosity oils, because an engine has to be designed for those. And if the tolerances in the engine, the surface roughness, the gaps, if they're not designed properly, those metal surfaces could start touching more frequently, and you could see a large amount of wear. Right. So you really got to be careful going too thin. That's what I would say is, going too thick is probably less of an issue than going too thin. Both have problems, but going too thin can be really detrimental to an engine. And you're going to start seeing a lot of really thin oils out there, or probably already are. Yeah. That you want to be careful about. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a few cars here that were 0W16, and I think I did see one that was 0W8, which kind of blew my mind. Like, wow, that is some really thin oil. And this is all just chasing efficiency, I guess, right? Drag in the motor and trying to improve fuel efficiency. Is that the name of the game with that?
That's the name of the game. Yeah, both in engine oils and transmission oils. Also, the whole drivetrain, drive line. I mean, that is the push, right? It's all about fuel efficiency. And though the engines that use 0W16s and 0W8s are great, right? They're designed for that, but other engines aren't. And so you have to be careful about swapping and going into those low regions. And you'll start seeing 0W16s more frequently on shelves in the U.S. as it becomes more frequent for most of the imported vehicles, say some from the Asian manufacturers, say Toyota or Honda, are pushing the limits there. And their engines are great and they're designed for that, but you got to be careful using those oils in other engines because you could really be minimizing the life of that engine.
Yeah, Pete's BMW back here takes like 0W60. We don't want to put that in there by mistake, do we? That wouldn't go well.
No. Well, and it's funny. I think BMW is one that actually does give you allowance for some temperature variation. If you look at their manual, I think they allow for different viscosity grades. Oh, they're pushing lower too. I think they have 0W30s for their more standard for their newer engines on the road. They're like in the 0W30 range, but they have 0W20s too now because again it's about fuel efficiency and it's competitive out there right now. So that's really the trend though. But you want to be careful going to really thin oils, guys. Yep.
Very good. Well, thanks so much for your time, Michael. I really appreciate it. It was educational, and let's do this again in the summer. Maybe we can talk about racing oils and how heat stress factors into how long we should go between intervals on our weekend fun cars and stuff like that.
Sounds great, guys. Yeah, always happy to help, and good luck with the project. It sounds like fun, and stay warm up there. Spring's almost here.
I know we're counting the days.